I stood behind the kitchen wall, a cup of peppermint tea trembling in my hand, as my son told his wife that my late husband disgusted him. He spoke the words with a coldness I had never heard before. They laughed about putting me in a nursing home so they could finally renovate. I pretended not to hear, but by 8 the next morning, I had already called a realtor to sell the house right out from under them. My name is Ruth Ann Doyle. I am 72 years old, and I have lived in the town of Riverton, Colorado, long enough to know that the mountains do not care about your grief and the wind does not care about your comfort. I was standing in the kitchen of the house my husband, Frank, had built with his own 2 hands. It was a Tuesday evening. The linoleum under my slippers was worn near the sink, a testament to 40 years of dishes, 40 years of dinners, and 40 years of standing exactly where I was standing now. I was making peppermint tea. The kettle had just begun to whistle, a low, rising note that usually signaled the end of my day. I was standing behind the partition wall, the one Frank had framed up to separate the kitchen from the living room, because he hated the smell of cooking grease getting on the sofa. I was invisible there. Then I heard it. My son, Ethan, was speaking to his wife, Lila. His voice was low. But in this old house, sound travelled through the vents like secrets. My dad disgusts me. The words were not shouted. They were spoken with a cold, flat venom that I had never heard from him before. He was over 40 years old, a man with his own greying hair, yet he sounded like a petulant child spitting out poison. My hand jerked. Boiling water splashed over the rim of the cup and scalded my thumb. I did not cry out. I froze. My first instinct was not anger, but a desperate, pathetic need to hide. I could not let them know I had heard. I grabbed a spoon and rattled it hard against the ceramic mug. Clink, clink, clink. I opened the cupboard door and slammed it shut, creating a clumsy pantomime of a woman who had just bustled in from the pantry. The smell of peppermint steam rose up, sharp and stinging in my nose. Above me, the long fluorescent bulb flickered with a buzzing sound, casting a pale, sickly light over the counters. Everything looked the same. The chipped formica, the magnetic calendar on the fridge, the drying rack. But a crack had opened up. It was invisible, running right down the center of the foundation, splitting the world into before and after. In the living room, the conversation shifted seamlessly, as if destroying a father's memory was just a preamble to business. We need to deal with the credit cards. Lila, Ethan said. The interest is killing us. I know, Lila replied. Her voice was smooth, lacking any real worry. Look, once we get your mum settled, into the facility, we can finally handle this place. If we knock out this wall and update the wiring, we can sell for a premium. My stomach twisted into a hard knot. They spoke of the facility, the nursing home, not as a care plan, but as a logistics solution. I was not a mother or a person to them anymore. I was an obstacle. I was a piece of antique furniture that needed to be moved into storage so they could stage the house for a sale. Frank was disgusting to them, and I was a burden to be processed. I walked out from behind the wall. I moved to the corner of the dining table and pulled out my chair. I sat down. I did not scream. I did not throw the tea. I wrapped my silence around me like a heavy, scratchy wool coat. It was the same silence that had protected me from Frank's temper for 30 years. The same silence that kept the peace when money was tight. But tonight, the silence did not comfort me. It only amplified the sound of my own heart hammering against my ribs. Oh, Hi, Mom, Lila said, looking up from her phone. Is that tea? It's just peppermint, I said. My voice sounded thin, like paper tearing. They went back to their screens. I sat there, sipping the hot water, feeling the burn go down my throat. Hours later, I lay in the master bedroom on the second floor. The ceiling above me had a water stain shaped like a map of a country that didn't exist. Downstairs, I could hear the murmur of the television and their occasional laughter. They were comfortable. They were planning their future on the grave of my past. My dad disgusts me. The phrase looped in my mind like a broken record. It refused to fade. I felt the heat behind my eyes, the pressure of tears wanting to fall. I squeezed my eyes shut and clenched my jaw. No, I would not cry. I had spent a lifetime compromising, smoothing things over, making sure the men in this house felt big and important. If my son could sit in the living room his father paid for with blood and sweat, and call him disgusting, then there was nothing left to protect. I stared up at the dark ceiling. A cold resolve settled over me, drying up the tears before they could spill. If they wanted to treat this house like an asset to be liquidated, then they should remember who held the deed. I was not dead yet. And tomorrow, I would prove it. The silence of the house usually felt like a companion, but tonight, it felt like a museum of ancient history. I sat in the dark and let my mind drift back to the beginning, back before the paint peeled and the floorboards groaned under the weight of secrets. We bought this place when Riverton was just a dust speck on the map. Frank Doyle, my husband, was an industrial machine mechanic who scrubbed his hands with pumice soap every night, but never quite got the grease out of his lifelines. I remember us standing in the empty shell of the living room. We were young and terrified of the mortgage. We did everything ourselves. I held the ladder while Frank hammered the crown moulding. We mixed the concrete for the back patio in a wheelbarrow, sweating through our shirts under the relentless Colorado sun. Frank used to slap the wall with a heavy, calloused hand and smile. "This is our fortress. Ruth Ann," he would say, "let the world go to hell outside. In here, we are safe." There was a specific memory that rose up, sharp and clear. Ethan was 10 years old. Frank had taken him up to the attic to inspect the insulation. I had followed them up, standing quietly near the trapdoor. Frank pointed a flashlight at the thick wooden beams that held the roof over our heads. "You see that wood?" son Frank had asked, his voice serious. "That is not just timber. That is hours of overtime. That is my back breaking so you have a dry place to sleep. One day you will decide what to do with this place. But I hope you remember whose sweat is in these beams." Back then, Ethan had looked at his father with wide, worshipping eyes. He did not see a disgusting man. He saw a titan. But titans have shadows. My shadow was Dovemont Assurance and Benefits. I worked the night shift processing claims, denying payouts to people who were desperate, following the strict, heartless guidelines of the policy handbook. I would come home at dawn, my eyes burning, and start cooking breakfast while Frank was fixing a leak under the sink before his own shift began. We were tired. We were always so tired. Then came 1992. It was the year everything changed. The year of the Dovemont incident that Ethan would later find in those archived news clippings. I remember the night Frank came home late. He did not smell like hydraulic fluid or machine oil. He smelled of stale cigar smoke, a scent that did not belong to him. He walked into the kitchen and placed a thick manila envelope on the table. It landed with a heavy thud. I looked at him. His face was pale beneath the grime. "Frank," I whispered. He put a hand over the envelope. His fingers were trembling just slightly. "We are going to pay off the mortgage." "Ruth Ann," he said. "We are going to be free of the bank. But you must promise me something. You must never ask me where this came from. Don't ask me." I knew. Deep down in my gut, I knew it was connected to the case at work, the one involving a denied medical claim for a man who later died because he could not afford his surgery. Frank had signed off on the maintenance logs that Dovemont used to justify the denial, claiming a machine error that never happened. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at the walls we had painted. I looked at the ceiling that sheltered my 10-year-old son sleeping upstairs. "Okay," I said. "I chose the house. I chose safety. We took the blood money, and we buried the truth under the foundation of our fortress." I stood up from the chair in the present day and walked into the hallway. My fingers traced the plaster. There were still indentations low on the wall where Ethan had drawn a superhero with a red crayon when he was 5. We had scrubbed the wax off, but the impression remained. This house was not just wood and brick. It was a crystallization of ambiguous moral choices. It was built on love, yes, but also on a terrible, silent sacrifice. That was why Ethan's words hurt so much. When he said his father disgusted him, he was not just judging Frank. He was judging me. He was judging the very walls that had kept him warm, unaware that his comfort was purchased with the integrity he now claimed to value so highly. I stopped by the stairs. If Frank was a monster in Ethan's eyes, then I was the monster's keeper. And I was done being passive. I was done hiding. They called it a temporary arrangement. That was the word Ethan used when he called me 3 months ago, his voice tight with the stress of a lost contract at his tech firm. He said they needed to regroup financially. So, they moved in, Ethan, Lila, and my 2 teenage grandchildren, Noah and Grace, descended upon my quiet life with boxes of high-end kitchen gadgets and an air of tragic inconvenience. To the neighbors, Lila played the role of the saintly daughter-in-law perfectly. I heard her over the fence, talking to Mrs. Higgins. We felt it was time to be closer to Mom, Lila had said, her voice dripping with performative sweetness. "She's getting older, and we want to make sure she's safe, inside the house." However, safety was not the priority. The priority was the Wi-Fi signal strength and the lighting for Lila's Zoom calls. Lila worked in marketing for a supplement company, and she treated my living room like a stage set. She pushed my old floral armchair into the garage because it clashed with the brand aesthetic when she live-streamed about gut health. The house now operated on a schedule that had no room for me. If I walked into the kitchen during Ethan's trading hours, I was met with a sharp glare. If I used the blender while Lila was recording, I was asked to stop. The refrigerator was the worst of it. Last week, I opened the door to find clear plastic bins labeled in Lila's sharp, angular handwriting, "Kids, us." And on the bottom shelf, a small, lonely bin labeled "Grandma." "It's just for organization, Mom," Lila had said when she saw me staring at it. "We have very specific dietary macros. It helps if you keep your heavy foods separate." I felt like a tenant in a boarding house. Dinner that night was a tense affair. We sat around the oak table Frank had refinished 20 years ago. Lila had set out square, modern plates that looked like tiles, I was looking at the comps in the neighborhood, Ethan said, cutting his chicken with surgical precision. The market is hot, but it's cooling. If we list this place soon, we could unlock the capital. That creates a down payment for a townhouse in Denver, something near the tech corridor. Lila nodded, not looking at him, but typing on her phone under the table. And really, Mom, she said, turning her gaze to me, her eyes wide and unblinking. It would be so much better for you. There are these communities now. Assisted living isn't what it used to be. It's like a resort. You wouldn't have to worry about the stairs. I don't mind the stairs, I said softly. But the upkeep, Ethan insisted, pointing his fork at the ceiling. The roof, the plumbing, it's a money pit. Mum, once you are in a facility, we can gut this place, flip it, and everyone wins. Can we please talk about literally anything else? Grace asked. She was 16 and the only one who seemed to notice the way my hand gripped the napkin. I have a history project due on Tuesday. Noah, my grandson, just stared at his phone, his thumb scrolling endlessly, refusing to look at me. I think he was ashamed. Or maybe he just didn't want to get involved. I forced a smile, the kind that hurts the corners of your mouth. Oh, don't worry about me. I am just listening to your big plans. After dinner? I tried to help. I carried the plates to the sink and started to load the dishwasher. Mom, please. Lila sighed, coming up behind me and taking a plate from my hand. You're blocking the sprayer arm. You have to angle them. Like this. If you do it wrong, I just have to wash them all over again. I was just trying to help. I said, I know, Ethan said from the doorway. He sounded exhausted, but Lila just wants things tidy. Just go sit down. Mum, we got it. I felt a sting of humiliation, hot and sharp. I was being managed. I was a child who couldn't be trusted with chores. I retreated to the living room, intending to read, but the air felt too thin. I walked toward the hallway and noticed the door to Frank's old study, now Ethan's home office, was slightly ajar. I heard Ethan's voice. He wasn't talking to Lila. The tone was different, vulnerable, angry. I can't look at her without thinking about it. Ethan was saying. There was a pause. He must have been talking to his therapist. I knew he had a session on Thursdays. I resent him. Ethan continued, his voice trembling slightly. My dad took the dirty money. My mum pretended not to see. And now I'm stuck with their legacy. Every time I look at this house, I see a payoff. I see a man who sold out. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. The Dovemont scandal. He knew. He judged Frank for the sin, and he judged me for the silence. And because of that judgment, he felt justified in stripping me of my home, as if evicting me was a form of moral correction. I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, my heart breaking all over again. They didn't just want the money, they wanted to erase the history. The blue light of the laptop screen cut through the darkness of the dining room. Ethan had left it open again, sitting on the oak table like an accusation. I meant to walk past it to get a glass of water. But a familiar word caught my eye in the bold headline. Dovemont. I froze. My hand hovered over the back of the chair. The article was from a digitized archive, dated October 1992. The headline read, The Claims Denied How Dovemont. Assurance buried the evidence. I leaned closer, my reading glasses dangling around my neck, unused, but the text was large enough to hurt. I scanned down the page until I saw it. The name jumped out at me like a physical blow: Frank Doyle. The article listed him as a compliant employee who had signed off on a fraudulent maintenance log, delaying a critical payout for a ventilator system in a client's hospital wing. A man had died because of that delay. My chest tightened. So this was it. This was what Ethan had found during his sleepless nights. He had gone looking for his father's history and found a monster. He saw the signature of a man who traded a stranger's life for a paycheck. But the article did not tell the story of the kitchen table. It did not mention the night Frank came home shaking, his face grey with terror. It did not describe the phone call from his district manager, a voice I could still hear, threatening to blacklist Frank from every union job in the state if he did not sign the paperwork to cover the company's error. The envelope of cash that appeared later was not a prize for being cruel. It was severance for his soul, a desperate attempt to pay off the mortgage so that if he did lose his job, his wife and son would not be on the street. I closed my eyes, and a sharp, bitter memory surfaced. A week after Frank brought the money home, a letter had arrived. It was handwritten. No return address, begging us to go to the police. I had stood over the sink, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and I had torn that letter into tiny, jagged pieces. I washed them down the drain. I chose silence. I chose the house. Ethan did not know about the threats. He did not know about the letter. He only knew the black and white text on a glowing screen. I had thought my silence protected him from the ugly complexities of the adult world, but instead it had left a vacuum that he filled with contempt. A floorboard creaked upstairs, but it was just the house settling. I moved away from the laptop, feeling sick. Later that night, the voices drifted from the master bedroom again. I was becoming a ghost in my own home, haunting the hallways, listening to the living judge the dead. I can't stand it. "Lila," Ethan said. His voice sounded thick, as if he had his hands over his face. I look at these walls and I just see the payoff. My dad took dirty money. He bought this house with blood money, and my mom pretended not to see. And now I'm stuck with their legacy. "Ethan, honey, breathe," Lila said. Her tone was not sympathetic, but pragmatic, like she was solving a math problem. "Look, if the house is dirty, then that is all the more reason to sell it. Think of it as liquidating a bad asset. We sell it, we take the equity, and we use it to build something clean, something ours. It makes me feel like I'm suffocating." Ethan whispered. "I feel like, I don't know. Like I'm complicit just by sleeping here. The house isn't a church." "Ethan," Lila replied sharply. "It's equity. It's money locked in wood and brick. We sell it, we wash the money, and we move on." I stepped back into the shadows of the linen closet. My heart was pounding a slow, heavy rhythm. The twist was cruel. They did not just want to sell the house for greed. They felt morally superior for doing it. Ethan believed he was washing his hands of a sin, and Lila believed she was extracting value from a mistake. I looked down at my hands. They were the only hands left that knew the truth. They thought the house was a stain on their conscience. I realized then that I could not let them sell it to cleanse themselves. The house was not a dirty asset. It was the only thing Frank had left, and I was the only one who could save it from being turned into their clean start. The next morning, the kitchen smelled of burnt toast and ambition. I was standing at the counter, scraping the black char off a slice of bread, when the smart speaker on the granite island suddenly came to life. It was not playing music. Instead, a cheerful, synthetic voice began broadcasting an advertisement for Silver Creek Meadows, a luxury assisted living facility on the outskirts of Denver. Imagine a life where care is always there. The voice crooned, dignity, comfort, community. Lila was sitting at the table, scrolling through her tablet. She did not look up, but her finger hovered over the volume button, turning it up just enough so that I could not ignore it. Ethan walked in, adjusting his tie. He glanced at the speaker, then at me. "You know, Mom," he said, pouring coffee into a travel mug. "That place has amazing reviews. You would have people there to look after you 24/7. Here. Well, we are just so busy. I'm terrified we're going to come home and find you hurt." He looked toward the hallway where I was standing. He wanted me to hear this. He wanted me to believe that my displacement was an act of mercy. Lila chimed in, her voice brisk and businesslike. "And honestly, Ethan, if we list this place next month, the equity is huge. We could pay off the debt, put a down payment on the new build in the city, and still have enough to buy into that seed round for your friend's startup. This house is a great financial stepping stone." I set the knife down. The metal clattered against the plate. I felt like a line item on a spreadsheet, a liability to be shifted so the assets could flow. I walked over to the table and sat down. My hands were cold. What if? I started, my voice trembling slightly before I steadied it. What if I don't want to go? The silence that followed was thick and awkward. Ethan and Lila exchanged a look, a quick, conspiratorial glance that married couples share when dealing with a difficult child. "Mom," Lila said, her tone dripping with patronizing patience. "You have to think long-term. You have to think about what is best for the family legacy. We are trying to build something here." I said nothing. I went back to scraping my toast. Later that afternoon, I found Noah sitting on the back porch steps. He was throwing a baseball into his glove, over and over again. Thwack, thwack, thwack. I sat down beside him. He didn't stop throwing the ball. "Your dad is stressed," I said, testing the waters. "He's a jerk," Noah muttered. "He caught the ball hard. He talks like Grandpa was some monster, but he was the only one who ever came to my baseball games. Dad is always on a call. Grandpa Frank used to sit right there in the bleachers, rain or shine." I looked at my grandson. He was trapped. He was caught between two versions of Frank Doyle, the warm man who cheered from the bleachers, and the cold name in the legal files that Ethan had resurrected. Ethan had chosen the file. He had decided that moral superiority was more valuable than memory. That night, the house was quiet, but the air felt heavy. I walked past the study door. It was closed, but the walls in this house were thin. I heard Ethan's voice, low and serious. He was on a Zoom call. "Basically, the deed is in my mother's name," Ethan was saying. "But she isn't as sharp as she used to be. I think we can move forward with a power of attorney to facilitate the sale. If we can prove capacity issues, we can expedite the listing." I stopped breathing. I stood in the dark hallway, my hand pressed against the wallpaper, not as sharp as she used to be. The words cut deeper than disgusts me. Disgust was an emotion. Calling me incompetent was a strategy. My son was not just hurting my feelings, he was preparing a legal cage. He was getting ready to strip me of my agency, to paint me as a senile old woman so he could sign away my home without my consent. I backed away silently. I walked into the living room and sat in the armchair next to the small, framed photo of Frank on the mantel. The streetlights from outside cast long, prison bar shadows across the rug. My heart was not racing anymore. It had slowed down to a cold, steady rhythm. Frank. I whispered to the empty room. If they think I am just a confused old woman, then I am going to show them exactly what a calculating old woman looks like. The morning sun did not bring warmth. It brought clarity. I waited until the tires of Ethan's SUV crunched down the driveway and Lila's car followed, taking the noise and the judgment with them. Once the house was silent, I did not cry. I went to work. I opened the small, cramped closet under the staircase. It smelled of cedar and old dust. I pulled out the metal filing cabinet I had not touched in years. My fingers moved with a purpose that surprised me. I flipped past the utility bills and the tax returns until I found the thick manila folder labeled Deed. The paper was yellowing, but the legal language was absolute. After Frank died, the title had transferred solely to me. My name, Ruth Ann Doyle, not Ethan Doyle, not the Doyle Family Trust, just me. Behind the deed, stuck to the back of the folder, was a sealed envelope with the Dovemont logo. It was dated the year Frank passed. I had been too grief-stricken to open it then, and later, too afraid. I sliced it open with a letter opener. Inside was a confirmation of a final security compensation payment and a certificate for preferred stocks that had been part of his severance package. I checked the dates. They were still valid, and given the market, they were likely worth more than just a few pennies. An hour later, I was sitting across a mahogany desk from Mariah Klein. Mariah and I had worked together in the claims department 30 years ago. She had been the one who quit to go to law school because she couldn't stomach the denials anymore. Now, she ran a small but fierce practice in downtown Riverton. Mariah adjusted her glasses and looked up from the documents. "Ruth Ann," she said, her voice firm and professional. "Let me be clear. This house is yours, period. Ethan cannot sell it. He cannot list it. And this power of attorney business he is talking about, it requires your signature, or a court order declaring you incompetent. And looking at you right now, no judge in Colorado would grant that. He thinks I am slipping," I said, keeping my voice steady. "He thinks if he repeats it enough, it will become true." Mariah leaned back, tapping a pen against her chin. "We can stop him. We can file a preemptive notice. But Ruth Ann, about this Dovemont paperwork. Did you know there is a group of young attorneys in Denver looking into the old cases, the 1992 claims? They are building a case that the executives scapegoated the floor managers like Frank." My heart skipped a beat. Vindication? It was sitting right there, waiting to be grabbed. "Do you want to tell Ethan?" Mariah asked softly. It might change how he sees his father." I thought about the way Ethan looked at the house like it was a dirty rag he wanted to throw away. I thought about the kids and grandma labels in the fridge. "I will," I said. "But not yet. Not while he looks at this house as a trophy to be cashed in. If I tell him now, he will just feel relieved that the money is clean, so he can spend it faster. I need to handle the house first." "What is the plan then? I want to sell it," I said. The words tasted like copper in my mouth, but they were necessary. But not to the highest bidder, and definitely not through Ethan's realtor friend. I want to sell it to a trust, a non-profit. I want it gone before he can file a single paper. Mariah's eyebrows shot up. She looked at me for a long moment. Then a slow smile spread across her face. You want to liquidate the asset before he can leverage it? She stated. Ruth Ann? That is ruthless. I learned from the best. I replied. I raised him, didn't I? We spent the next hour outlining the strategy. We discussed selling to a specific organization, setting up the funds so they would be untouchable by family members, and finding me a transitional living arrangement. On the walk back to the bus stop, I stopped at a drugstore and bought a small, black, spiral notebook. I sat on the bench, ignoring the cold wind biting at my cheeks, and I wrote down my instructions. 1. Confirm the market value of the house. 2. Select a buyer who will not negotiate with Ethan. 3. Secure a new apartment in Clearwater. 4. Prepare the truth about Frank for Ethan. 5. Do not turn back. I closed the notebook and put it in my purse. The trembling in my hands had stopped. I wasn't just a mother anymore, and I wasn't a victim. I was the owner of the house on Elm Street. And I was closing the deal. The plan moved forward, with the quiet precision of a clock ticking inside a locked drawer. Through Mariah, I was introduced to Sarah, a representative from Haven Ridge Homes. They were a non-profit organization that purchased older properties and converted them into transitional housing for women over 60 who had been displaced by divorce, widowhood, or financial abuse. The irony was sharp enough to cut. Ethan saw this house as a monument to dirty money, a stain he needed to scrub clean by selling it to a developer. I saw a chance to turn Frank's fortress into a sanctuary. If the foundation was indeed built on a moral grey area, then perhaps filling the rooms with women who needed safety was the only way to truly balance the ledger. Sarah sat at my kitchen table while Ethan and Lila were at work. She outlined the offer. They would pay a fair market value, not the inflated bidding war price Lila dreamed of, but a solid number. The deal included a leaseback clause allowing me to stay for 3 months rent-free, while I finalized my move to a senior co-housing community in a lakeside town called Clearwater. It was perfect. It was an escape hatch that looked like a business transaction. The heist began on a Tuesday. I scheduled the inspection for noon. I felt like a thief in my own home, watching the driveway from behind the curtains. When the inspector arrived, a quiet man with a clipboard, I ushered him in quickly. He moved through the rooms efficiently, checking the furnace and the wiring. I followed him, my heart hammering against my ribs every time a car drove past outside. Who is this guy? I spun around. Noah was standing in the kitchen doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder. He had come home early from school. My stomach dropped. He is just a friend of your grandfather's. I lied, but my voice wavered. Noah looked at the inspector, who was clearly photographing the water heater, and then back at me. He was 16, not 6. He knew what a home inspection looked like. Grandma, he said, stepping closer, his voice low. Are you selling the house? I looked at my grandson. I could not lie to him twice. I'm making sure no one can kick me out of my own life. Noah, I whispered fiercely. I need you to trust me, please. Noah studied my face for a long, agonizing second. Then he looked at the inspector and shrugged. Okay, he said. I didn't see anyone. He walked past me to the fridge, grabbed a soda, and went upstairs. He was keeping my secret. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Meanwhile, The pressure from Ethan and Lila was mounting. Lila began leaving glossy brochures on my pillow. Sunset Gardens. The Pines. They were fancy nursing homes with exorbitant fees. I just want you to see the options. Mom, she said one evening, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. They have Pilates classes. Ethan was less subtle. He cornered me in the living room while I was folding laundry. Mom, I need the deed, he said. His hand extended. I can't find it in the filing cabinet. Did you move it? Mariah has it, I said calmly, smoothing a wrinkle in a towel. She is keeping my papers organized for me. Why does your lawyer have the deed? Ethan demanded, his voice rising. We are trying to help you here. Why do you have to make everything so difficult? I am not making it difficult. Ethan, I am just being careful. Careful. He laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. Like Dad was careful I don't trust him anymore. Mom. So don't make me trust anyone else. Just give me the papers so we can fix this mess. His shout echoed off the walls. Noah and Grace froze at the dining table, their homework forgotten. The air in the room shattered. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, his face twisted with a grief that had curdled into anger. He truly believed he was the victim of this house. I looked at him and felt a profound sadness. But my resolve did not crack. I'm going to bed, I said quietly. I climbed the stairs, my knees aching. As I reached the landing, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Mariah. Havenridge approved the purchase. Papers are ready. Transfer can happen as soon as you sign. I walked into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the mattress. I looked around the room. I looked at the spot where Frank used to pile his work clothes. I imagined the house in 6 months. I did not see Lila's open-concept kitchen or the marble island she coveted. I saw different women here. I saw a woman sleeping in this room who finally felt safe after years of fear. I saw women drinking tea in the kitchen, rebuilding their lives just as I was about to rebuild mine. It was a better legacy than a check in Ethan's bank account. I picked up the phone and typed a reply to Mariah. I am ready. The ink was black and permanent. I sat in the conference room at Havenridge, the leather chair cool against my back, and watched my own hand move across the paper. It was a wrinkled hand, spotted with age, but it did not shake. The pen scratched against the fibre of the page, a dry, rhythmic sound that felt like a clock ticking down. With each signature, I was not just selling a building, I was evicting my own son from his inheritance. And this is the final transfer, Sarah said gently. I pressed the pen down hard. The ink bled slightly into the paper fibres. Sealing the deal? It was done. The house was no longer the Doyle family asset. It was a shelter. Back at the house. The delusion continued. Lila was on the phone in the kitchen, pacing back and forth in her yoga pants. She did not know she was standing in someone else's property. No. Absolutely. She was saying to a contractor, "We want to blow out the back wall. An open concept. Marble Island. Something that really pops on camera." I stood in the doorway, holding a basket of laundry. I listened to her tear down the walls Frank had put up. I listened to her shatter the tiles he had laid. It was all a fantasy. I watched her with a strange detachment, like watching a movie where you know the ending, but the characters do not. Later that afternoon, I was sorting through a box of old books in the garage when I found it. It was a composition notebook, the cover peeling at the corners. Ethan's journal from 1994. I opened it to a random page. The handwriting was looped and messy, the script of a 14-year-old boy. I am proud of Dad. It read, "He works so hard. One day, I will buy him a bigger house." I ran my thumb over the words. The boy who wrote this was gone, replaced by a man who looked at the same father and saw only a stain. My reverie was broken by Noah. He slouched against the garage doorframe, kicking at the concrete. "I don't want to go to Denver." He mumbled. "If we move, I lose my spot on the varsity team. Mom doesn't care. She just wants a house that looks like a magazine. Change is hard." "Noah," I said. "It's not just change," he said, looking up. Why do we have to destroy everything to move forward?" He understood more than his parents did. The plan almost fell apart on Thursday. Ethan came home early, his face flushed with the stress of the commute. On the entry table, I had carelessly left a letter from Havenridge regarding the final inspection. Ethan picked it up before I could cross the room. "Havenridge Homes," he asked, squinting at the logo. "Who is this?" "Mum, is this another bill?" My heart hammered against my ribs. If he opened it, he would see the purchase agreement. "No," I said, snatching the envelope from his hand with a speed that surprised us both. "It is just a charity thing. Mrs. Higgins asked me to sign as a witness for a donation. It is nothing." Ethan looked at me, then at the envelope. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Just be careful what you sign. Mom, people take advantage of seniors." "I know," I said. "I am very careful." He walked away. He was so convinced of my incompetence that he did not even suspect my agency. That evening, a courier dropped off a packet from Mariah. It was the draft of the class action lawsuit against Dovemont. It detailed how the executives had coerced floor managers to sign fraudulent logs. If I joined the suit, Frank's name would be cleared legally. I placed the lawsuit draft on my dresser next to the copy of the house sale contract. 2 pieces of paper, one to clean the name, one to clean the house. Lila was beginning to notice something. She was a predator in her own way, and she sensed a change in the wind. I had stopped apologizing. When I dropped a spoon at dinner, I did not gasp and scramble to pick it up. I simply picked it up. When I walked into a room, I did not hug the walls. I caught her watching me that night. Her eyes narrowed as I poured myself a glass of water and walked past her without asking if she needed anything. Later, when I went to the bathroom, I heard the metallic slide of my filing cabinet drawer opening downstairs. She was hunting, but the papers were already safe with Mariah. The house was dark when Grace found me on the porch. She sat on the swing beside me. "Grandma," she whispered. "I'm scared Dad is going to be like the grandpa he talks about. You know, cold, caring more about money than people." I took her hand. It was warm and small. "You have a choice, Grace," I said firmly. "You can choose not to be like anyone. You are not a copy." When she went inside, I remained on the porch. I held the envelope containing the finalized contract against my chest. The wind rattled the wind chimes Frank had hung 20 years ago. I looked up at the brass house numbers he had screwed into the siding. They were tarnished, but they were still there. "Frank," I whispered into the cold night air, "I will not let them use this house to bury anyone else. It is finished." The morning sun was sharp enough to cut glass. It was the day the Havenridge team was scheduled for their final measurements, the last step before the property officially changed hands. I stood at the head of the oak dining table and called them in. My voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made Ethan and Lila stop their frantic morning routine. "Sit down," I said. "We need to talk about this house you are dreaming of tearing down." They sat. Lila looked annoyed, checking her watch, while Ethan looked weary. I placed 2 thick envelopes on the wood between us. They landed with a heavy, final sound. "This one is for both of you," I said, tapping the first envelope. "And this one," I slid the second envelope toward Ethan, "is for you alone." Ethan reached for the first envelope. He tore the flap open with a frown, pulling out the stapled legal documents. His eyes scanned the header. I watched the colour drain from his face, leaving him as pale as the milk in his coffee cup. "Transfer of ownership." He read, his voice barely a whisper. "Ruth Ann Doyle to Haven Ridge Homes Foundation." He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a hook. "Mom? Mom, you sold the house." Lila snatched the papers from his hand. Her eyes darted across the lines, calculating the loss in real time. Then she slammed her hand down on the table, rattling the silverware. "Are you insane?" she screamed. The mask of the caring daughter-in-law shattered completely. "You sold it to a charity for what? A tax write-off. Do you have any idea what you have done to our financial future? You selfish. You chose a bunch of strangers over your own family." I looked at her. I did not blink. "Family does not look at each other's homes like merchandise," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And strangers never stood in my kitchen and called my husband disgusting, right inside the house he built with his own hands." The room went silent. The air was sucked out of the space. Ethan froze. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He remembered the Tuesday night, the peppermint tea, the cruelty he thought was private. Ethan started, but the word died in his throat. "Open the second envelope," I commanded. Ethan's hands were shaking so badly he tore the paper. He pulled out the copies of the Dovemont files Mariah had prepared. He saw the internal memos. He saw the affidavit from the old district manager, confirming that Frank Doyle had been threatened with blacklisting if he did not sign the fraudulent logs. He saw the proof that Frank had been the only one pushing to pay the claim until they crushed him. He read it. He read the story of a man who took a bullet to save his wife and son from homelessness. The anger in Ethan's face dissolved, replaced by a horrifying, hollow look of shame. He dropped the papers. He looked at the window, out toward the porch where Frank used to sit and smoke in the dark, carrying the weight of a sin that wasn't his. He didn't take the money because he was greedy. Ethan whispered. He took it. Because he was scared. He was scared for us. He sold his peace of mind to buy this roof, I said softly. And you wanted to sell the roof to buy a townhouse. Ethan turned to Lila. There were tears in his eyes, hot and heavy. "We've been planning to profit from the only good thing he ever managed to save for us," he said, his voice breaking. "Lila, we are the vultures. It's just real estate." Lila snapped, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. She was looking at the signed contract, realizing the money was gone. Ethan ignored her. He turned to me. He looked like a little boy again, the one who used to draw superheroes on the wall. "Mom," he choked out. I was wrong about Dad. And I was wrong about you." I looked at him. I loved him. But love was no longer a reason to be a doormat. I sold the house, I stated clearly. I used a portion of the proceeds to endow the Haven Ridge project, so this place will be a sanctuary for women who have nowhere else to go. I used another portion to buy a small apartment for myself in Clearwater. Lila's head snapped up. She was doing the math. And the rest is in a trust, I said. For Noah and Grace, it will pay for their college. You and Ethan cannot touch a cent of it. Not for a startup. Not for a new car. Not for a marble island. I stood up. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. I am protecting the next generation, I said, looking down at my son. Just like your father did. But I am also protecting them from you. The day the keys changed hands. A small truck with the logo Haven Ridge Homes pulled into the driveway. Men in work boots stepped out, carrying ladders and paint buckets, moving with a respectful efficiency. They planted a sign in the front lawn, Future Haven Ridge Transitional Home. I saw Mrs. Higgins from next door peek through her blinds, her lips moving as she undoubtedly broadcast the news to the rest of the neighborhood. Ethan and Lila were loading the last of their things into the black SUV. There was no more talk of knocking down walls or installing marble islands. The dream of the renovation had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard reality. Lila slammed the trunk shut with a violence that made the car shake. She was furious, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Her jaw set tight. Ethan, by contrast, looked like a ghost. His eyes were swollen and red, the evidence of a sleepless night spent wrestling with the truth about his father. Noah and Grace came up to the porch where I was standing. The wind was picking up, rattling the wind chimes one last time. "Grandma," Noah said, his voice cracking. He hugged me hard, burying his face in my shoulder. I held them both, smelling the fresh detergent on their clothes and the faint scent of childhood that still clung to them. "This will be a home for many women like me now," I told them, smoothing Grace's hair. "But you two, you will always have a place in my heart. You do not need a fixed address for that." They walked to the car, heads down. Ethan stayed behind. He motioned toward the empty living room. "Mom," he said hoarsely, Can I just have a minute?" We stood in the center of the room. The furniture was gone. The rectangle of sunlight on the floor was the only decoration left. I saw him as a monster. Ethan confessed, looking at the floorboards. Because of the articles, and because I was still that angry little boy waiting for him to come home from work, I found it so easy to believe the worst because I wanted to blame someone. He looked up at me, tears spilling over, and I treated you like you were just an obstacle. I was ungrateful to the only person who kept his memory alive. I did not hug him. I did not say it is okay. That would have been a lie. And I was done with lies. The guilt is yours to carry. "Ethan," I said, my voice steady. "But you can choose how to answer it. You can answer it by respecting the living, or you can repeat the cycle of silence and blame." "Let me buy it back," he pleaded, stepping forward, his hands shaking. I can get a loan. I can cancel the contract with Haven Ridge. We can keep it in the family. It is too late," I said. "The ink is dry. And frankly, Ethan, you want to do the right thing, then start by building your own home. Build it somewhere else, in a different way. Do not stand on the back of another man anymore." I looked past him to the doorway. Lila was standing there. She had heard everything. For the first time, she did not interrupt. She did not offer a marketing spin. She looked at me, then at Ethan. and I saw the realization sink in. She could not blame this on a generational difference. She had been cruel to an old woman because it was convenient, and now she had to live with that reflection in the mirror. They left 10 minutes later. As the SUV backed out, I turned to the Havenridge site manager. He was holding a screwdriver, ready to take down the old house numbers. "Wait," I said. "Keep the numbers. And that hook, the rusty one by the door. My husband put that there. Leave it." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." It was the only thread I left attached. By late afternoon, I was unlocking the door to my new apartment in Clearwater. The senior co-housing complex was alive. I walked down the hallway and saw people my age planting tomatoes in a community garden and practicing Tai Chi on the lawn. I set my suitcase down in the middle of the compact, modern living room. I opened the window. The sound of the lake drifted in, accompanied by distant laughter and the hum of traffic on the highway. It sounded like peace. I sat down in my new armchair, facing the view. My phone buzzed on the side table. It was Ethan. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I let the vibrations settle into the wood of the table. I was not rushing to soothe him. I was not afraid of losing him. I picked up the phone and pressed the green button. "Hello? Ethan?" I said. I did not ask what's wrong. I simply waited. I opened my mouth to speak, ready to set the terms for every conversation we would have from this day forward. I was no longer speaking from the shadows of a kitchen wall. I was speaking from my own home, on my own dime, and with my own truth. Thanks so much for listening to this story. It was a heavy one, but I think a lot of us can relate to those complicated family dynamics. I would love to know where you guys are listening from today. Drop a comment down below and let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, please subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel. Smash that like button. And if you really want to support us, hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people. See you in the next one.